All right, let's jump right in. We're looking at a huge political story coming out of Australia, one that's really shaking things up. A populist party is seeing a massive surge in the polls, and believe it or not, it all kicks off with a pretty unbelievable decision. Okay, so get this. Imagine you're a political leader. You get an invitation to meet with the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. That's a massive photo op, right? Well, Pauline Hanson, the leader of One Nation, got that invite, and she said no. You have to ask, what could possibly be more important than that? This is what was more important. Instead of getting on a plane to the US, Hanson stayed home to focus on a state election in South Australia. And wow, this chart shows you just how much that bet paid off. So yeah, you see Labor out in front, no real surprise there. But look at what's happening right behind them. That's One Nation pulling in 22% of the vote, leapfrogging the mainstream conservative Liberal Party, who are back at 19. And let me be clear, this isn't just some small polling blip. This is a political earthquake. In a key state, One Nation has basically just become the main opposition to the party in power. This one result is a perfect snapshot of a trend that has the entire Australian political world sitting up and paying very close attention. So that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. What is going on here? What's fueling this pretty dramatic shift? Well, the analysis points to three main drivers. One's about your bank account, one's about social fears, and the last one, well, it's all about political style. Let's kick things off with the first, and maybe the most powerful factor, and it's something that probably feels familiar to a lot of people everywhere: good old-fashioned economic anxiety. People are feeling the pinch, and that feeling creates some really fertile ground for political change. It's really like a perfect storm of financial pressure, you know? You've got high inflation, so your groceries, your gas, everything's more expensive. The general cost of living just keeps climbing. And then there's this massive housing shortage, which means for a lot of people, the classic Australian dream of owning your own home just feels completely out of reach. And all these issues are being tied directly into the debate around something called the Big Australia Agenda. So what is this Big Australia Agenda? Well, basically, for a long time, the policy has been to use high levels of immigration to keep the population growing and the economy expanding. But the critics are now pointing out that this policy has some major side effects, especially when it comes to things like housing and having enough infrastructure to go around. So here's the debate. On one side, people are worried that the current system is putting way too much pressure on housing and infrastructure. They argue it's just importing labor for the gig economy, like for ride-sharing apps, instead of what the country really needs. The alternative being proposed, a smaller, much more targeted program that focuses on bringing in people who have skills that are genuinely in short supply, like tradespeople, the very people you need to build more houses and infrastructure. And that economic anxiety flows right into our second driver, some really deep social tensions. And this is where the conversation gets a lot more heated. What we're seeing is that One Nation's platform is really built on two main pillars that are hitting a nerve right now: a strong stance against immigration at its current scale, and a very vocal opposition to radical Islamist extremism. These messages are tapping into a real sense of unease that's growing among certain voters. And just to give you a sense of the raw emotion here, this quote captures it perfectly. This was a protester yelling at the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese during a visit to a mosque. It's described as an incredibly volatile moment, and it just shows you the level of anger simmering in some communities. So what's feeding all this concern? Well, a few things. Recent terror events have made the threat of extremism feel incredibly real to people. There's a growing fear that extremist ideas are getting a foothold. And in that kind of environment, some voters are looking for a leader who they believe will offer a stronger response. And because the mainstream Liberal Party's position on immigration seems kind of unclear to people, One Nation is stepping right into that gap. Now for the third driver. And what's so fascinating about this one is that it has less to do with actual policies and way more to do with personality and how you talk to people. It's really about a total rejection of the political establishment. So first, listen to this quote from the Prime Minister. It's a classic, carefully worded political line, right? The source we're looking at basically calls this kind of talk waffle. It's safe, it's polished, but to a lot of voters, it just sounds empty and, frankly, fake. Okay, now contrast that with this. This is Pauline Hanson talking to another politician. It is direct, it's fiery, and it is definitely not some focus group's talking point. She isn't trying to sound like your typical politician, and that's exactly the point. And that is the third key driver right there. We're living in an age where a lot of people really distrust politicians. So when Hanson comes out with this blunt, unscripted style, her supporters see it as authentic. It feels like a breath of fresh air compared to the carefully managed soundbites they're used to. This is also a huge part of her brand. She paints herself not as a powerful insider, but as the outsider, the underdog, who the elites are always trying to silence. And for voters who already feel ignored or looked down upon by the establishment, that's an incredibly powerful story to tell. Okay, so you have these three drivers, all pushing support towards one nation. But what does that actually mean for the bigger political picture? Well, for the conservative side of politics, it creates a massive, massive headache. Here's the whole problem in a nutshell. You have voters who would normally vote for the mainstream conservative Liberal Party, but now a big chunk of them are voting for one nation instead. This splits the conservative vote, and a divided opposition makes it way, way easier for the ruling Labour Party to hold on to power. So what you've got is this crazy dilemma. You have two parties on the right, the Liberals and One Nation, who are now essentially fighting each other for the exact same voters. And while they're busy fighting each other, their combined chance of actually winning an election just gets smaller and smaller. And all of this leads to the final, really provocative question. With One Nation support growing like this, is the only way for the conservative side to get back into power to stop fighting each other and actually form a coalition? It's a question that could very well define the next chapter of Australian politics.